Hello and welcome back to Web 110, HTML and CSS. So this is going to be a longer video, but I'm only going to have 2 videos for this week. I'm going to put everything that is in chapter 11 in this video, and then the next video is going to be just kind of helpful resources that should help you with your final project, and then just future resources that you might want to look into once this class is over. And there's going to be a bit of a mix-up of different concepts from this chapter. It can kind of be broken down into working with audio and video, working with basic animations, if you want to call it that, kind of basic changes in how you can change things. If you're familiar with, let's say, Photoshop, for example, you might know those as transforming something. So we're going to look at the transform property. And then there's going to be some information on how to create a list that is inside of another list. A good reason for that might be creating a drop-down menu. And then working with details and summary elements, which is also another good way of showing and concealing information. And then there's just a little bit of information on future topics like, what is JavaScript, what is jQuery, so that way when you look at that in the future, you have kind of a general idea of it. So what I want to do first is I want to talk about different types of media files. So under week 7, you'll notice I've got a bunch of different resources. Now, this first section with the MLA general format, that is there to help you when you are figuring out how to do your credits for your final project. And that's just to give you a starting place. You can use other resources too, but that's a really good one, especially for looking up how to reference articles from online websites, and then also how to reference images or videos. I then have information here for working with CSS3. That is going to be one of the requirements that you have for your final project, is that you need to have a CSS3 style. And one of your videos from before actually looks at a lot of different CSS3 styles. Some examples would be using opacity, border radius, box shadow, text shadow, things that tend to be a little bit more three-dimensional. So the chapter where all of those were introduced, I want to say, I think that's chapter 6, you'll see a lot of them in there. But then also, what will also count is the transform and transition that are going to be talked about in this chapter. So that's why I'm bringing it up now, and we'll look at that in a little bit. And then I've got all of these links for multimedia. So there's some links here for video, audio, working with YouTube videos, working with iframe, canvas, drop downs. And so in order to make this easy, rather than having you download a bunch of audio and video files, I'm just going to be referencing a lot of W3 School's website files, and we'll just be taking a look at those. And then same thing with transitions and transforms. We're going to be looking at some links there to help illustrate some of that. And then the next video that I'm going to record is going to go over the responsive design and the future resources. All right, so looking at your textbook, I'm on page 397, and there are these 2 tables. There's the first one says commonly used audio file types, and then there is commonly used video file types. And I want to look at this list, and then I also have some links that are on Canvas. So on this first one that it says HTML multimedia, it's going to talk about different browser support, and there's a list of common video formats, and so they have their own table, and then they have a table of common audio formats. And then let me just look. Yeah, that's basically all that they have here. Now these other ones are going to go into a little bit more detail in working with audio and video, but I wanted to start first with the different file format types. And so your book starts with audio, so we can start there. So the books list is actually a lot briefer, and it's not going to talk about as much. It's really hyper-focusing on what you can use. And so it lists MP4 files. That's potentially one that you're more familiar with. That's going to be working with video more so. It's usually when you see an MP4 file, usually that is video. It's also listing this AAC file, Advanced Audio Coding, and then there's MP3. That's probably what you're most familiar with, and that would be my recommendation for what you use. And then there is this OGG file, and then there's a WAV file. Now, there's different benefits to working with these different files, and there's a difference between if you're working with a file for web and if you're working with a file for digital media purposes. So if somebody was working with an audio file and they were wanting to record in, let's say you're recording in our audio booth and you're recording audio to be worked with for video, my recommendation would be save your files as a WAV file, because it's going to work the best in that software and you're not going to have to worry so much about compression. But then once you are getting ready for that video to get put on a website, that's where you might want to start thinking about changing it to an MP3 file. So some files are going to be better when you're working with the assets, and then there's going to be some files that are better when you're working with the assets to go onto the web. So that's why I wanted to give a little bit of context to some of these things. And you'll notice down below there's the video file types where they list MP4 files. Now MP4 files, that's just going to be the best type of file for you to use for video. And that's going to be whether you're working with video on your own computer or you're putting it on the web. And I'll go into a little bit more of this. You'll see there, I don't really care for how they are showing this. They're kind of mixing it a little bit together where it's kind of hard to really see and understand, because they're listing files like MOV, but then they're putting it next to like MP4 and everything. So I'm going to actually have us look at this list instead. And they've got it kind of swapped in order. So some of these are good to know about just historically. So MIDI files, for example, that's musical instrument digital interface. So let's say that you had like a music keyboard that you were using and you were recording a song, and you wanted to plug that into your computer and record a file. It would turn it into a MIDI file. And these used to be used a lot more frequently, and you won't see them as often now. And you'll see it says plays well on all computers and music hardware, but not in web browsers. So this is not something that you would be able to easily use, and it's not going to be as common. We've got here Real Audio, developed by Real Media to allow streaming of audio with low bandwidth, does not play in web browsers. So a lot of the things you're going to see on here are does not do, but it's good for you to know what you can't work with, so that way if you're ever working with someone in the future and they give you a file type, you'll know that you can't use that. So we've got Windows Media audio file, and that is going to be the default. If you are on a Windows computer, a lot of times if you try to record a video, it will save it as a WMA file, and so you would need to know how you can change that file into an MP4 file instead, so that way you can actually work with it. So that's one of those good to know sort of things. It also means that it's what's called proprietary, which means it can only be opened in by certain software or by certain applications. So if you're on a Windows computer, you can open it, but if you are on a Mac computer, you wouldn't be able to. Here we have AAC file developed by Apple as the default format for iTunes, plays well on Apple computers, but not in web browsers. So that would be another thing where if you are recording something on a Mac, chances are by default your computer is going to save that file as an AAC file, and you would need to know how to change that file into a different format. WAV files play well on Windows, Macintosh, and Linux operating systems, supported by HTML. As a person who teaches classes where we work with sound and video, I much prefer working with WAV files. There's a lot less issues when bringing it into different software and working with it, and you don't have to worry so much about the compression. But it's not going to be, like, if you were to rank it for what you would want to use for web, I would probably rank it second best. I would put MP3s over that. but it's a really good file type, especially when you are working with creating the assets. Next, we've got OGG file, and that one is supported by HTML. So far we have WAV and OGG files that you actually can use. MP3 files are actually the sound part of MPEG files. MP3 is the most popular format for music players, so you'll see it all over. So it's also very popular, and it combines good compression, so making it a small file size with high quality, supported by all browsers. So that would be my number one recommendation, would be to use an MP3 file when you are uploading to the web. It's going to make the file smaller, but it's going to keep a better quality. It might not be as good of a quality as a WAV file, but it's going to be a good starting place, and it's going to be supported. And then you technically could use an MP4, which is usually used for video. Now looking at our video files, you'll notice that there's some similarities. Like here we have MPEG file, the first popular video format, not supported anymore. AVI files. Now this is a good file for editing videos and creating just your assets to work with, but it only works on Windows computers. So if you were working in an environment where you were going back and forth and trading files between someone who's on a Windows computer and somebody who is on a Mac, AV files are not going to be a good choice. But if you're just working by yourself, it's a good file type to use. Here we have Windows Media Video, developed by Microsoft, commonly used in video cameras and TV hardware. Plays well on Windows computers, but not in web browsers. This is another type of file type where if you are creating a file on a Windows computer, by default, it more than likely will save it as this file type unless you tell it to save it something else. In a similar way, we've got our MOV file, that's QuickTime. It's an Apple proprietary file type. It plays well on Apple computers, but not in web browsers. So it's something that you could work with on your computer, and you could temporarily use it, but ultimately you'd want to change it to an MP4. Got Real Video, developed by Real Media to allow video streaming with low bandwidths, does not play in web browsers. Flash is not able to play in web browsers, it's no longer supported. And we've got our OGG file again, supported. We've got WebM, which is also supported, and then we've got our MP4, which is just, I would say, all around top pick, both for creating assets and then also putting it on the web. So commonly used in video cameras and TV hardware, supported by all browsers and recommended by YouTube. So those are going to be my top options. And if you go to these links here, like I'm going to look at the HTML audio, they've got browser support here where it'll tell you now audio and video elements. So you bring up the files by putting it in an audio or video element. They are new to HTML5, and so older browsers might not support working with it. So it's good to know which ones will. And then what's really great here is we have our top 3 picks, MP3, WAV, and OGG files. And you'll notice we've got this little asterisk next to Edge, where it's saying from Edge 79 on. So older versions of Edge or Internet Explorer might not be able to work with WAV or OGG files. And then you'll notice here, Safari, so Mac computers can't do OGG files. So that's where I would say MP3 wins. So if you're looking for kind of a default option, I would definitely recommend that. And this will give you some information on how to actually write out the tag and everything. I'm just going to scroll up to the example. Let's see what the most basic one looks like. So I'm just going to click on this. And so you'll see you have the audio tag, and then you can do controls as an attribute, and they abbreviate it, but you can do controls equals controls. And it'll basically bring up the controls like the playhead and the time, and that might look a little different depending on what browser you're in. And then you use a source element inside of it, and that's something that I talked about. I'm trying to remember what chapter it would have been in. I want to say maybe chapter 7 when looking at the picture element, because the picture element also was looking at using source, so you could source different pictures depending on the size of your window. So you could say, I want to use picture and then source for the different sizes. So here what they're saying is, I want to use the OGG file, and then they are sourcing, kind of like you would with the image, what the file is going to be. And then you also need to specify the type. So that's where you would put audio and then /OGG file. So here, horse, because it's an MP3 file, you would type in MPEG. Now, if you're a little unsure of what to type for the type attribute, that's where this link is really handy and why I like to share it, because down here it's got this really nice little chart where it shows if it's an MP3, then you can type in MPEG. If it's OGG, you can type in OGG. If it's a WAV file, you can type in WAV. And then our video is going to be really similar, only this time we can add in width and height dimensions to it. If you don't, it'll just figure out what the width and height should be based off of the video that you're using. And then you'll notice here we've got source movie.mp4, and then we have to say what type it is, so you need to make sure you include both of those things. And then what they're doing here is they're actually leaving a little message where they're saying your browser does not support the video tag, so that way if it doesn't work, that text will show up instead. And they also have some other attributes in here that they are highlighting, like autoplay. So if for whatever reason you wanted to include autoplay, which a lot of people find annoying, you could include that. Here they have autoplay, but they have it muted. So maybe it just starts playing, but you don't hear it. And then we have our browser support. And we've got a similar list of things. We've got MP4, WebM, OGG. Now, I would lean towards MP4 just because that's usually what people use outside of putting files on the web anyways. So it's going to be the most common file type people are already using. So I would say MP4 file. So MP3, MP4, pretty easy to remember. And then we've got the media type. Now this one doesn't say MPEG like the MP3 does, it just says MP4. But then we've got WebM, and then we've got our OGG files. And if you want to look at any of these examples, you can always go to try it yourself, and then you can see what it looks like. It'll look a little bit different depending on the browser. And then they've just added this little paragraph underneath of it to give credit to where that video came from. Now, it's a good idea when you are working with video and audio for you to think about accessibility and include different things, whether it's including captions on your video, or it could be including a transcript, so that way if somebody is listening to a podcast, there is a transcript of all of the things that were said in it, and people can look at that document. So as you are showing a file, you might also include a link to download the file, and that might also be a backup option too, where let's say that someone doesn't have the capability in their browser of being able to look at the HTML5 video element or the HTML5 audio element. If you just put a file download, then they would be able to preview that. So this is where I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code, and I might be copying some really basic text from the examples and everything rather than writing things out. But we're going to keep things kind of basic and try to go through things pretty quickly. So I'm just going to call this probably, let me create a folder, week 7. I'm going to just call this media. Then we'll choose HTML. So kind of going with our basic template, I just put multimedia in for the title. Now, linking to your file, and let's do multimedia to H2. So I'll just say file download. Now this is something that you do need to have for your final, but it's kind of more straightforward than you think. So let's say that you have a file and it's just called movie.mp4. All you'd have to do is link to that file, and it should prompt someone to either view it in their browser or be able to save it and download it to your computer. So that's where you might have the video element above it, and then you could put that underneath of it. So that would be something where it'd be really great to think about. If someone has an older browser, you could have a file download, but then also if you have, let's say, a podcast or something, you could have a PDF with a transcript of what was said in that file, and people could download it. Now for your final project, you could have a download of whatever you want. Maybe you want to have a file download of one of the images that you're using and link to it in your credits, or you could have a file download of one of the articles or something, but you're going to need to have one instance of a file download. All right, so we already did look at the audio and video, but whoops, I'm just doing a lot of typos today. So we've got audio element, video element. So audio will have the audio tags, video have video tags. Both of them inside, you need to source what you are referencing. And the source tag is going to be like the image tag, where it's going to just have the opening part. So in our audio, we have different attributes. You can use source, type, autoplay, controls, loop, preload, title. Ones that I think we're going to be more interested in are probably going to be controls, and I can just go ahead and type that in there. You can also use like loop for audio, might be something that could be handy if you're having it kind of be more of a background sound. Preload would mean that even before someone clicks play on it, it's already going to load up, so it doesn't take a while. So that might be one, especially for video, that could be handy. So I'll do controls here as well, because we want to be able to see what we have. And again, with controls, you can do just controls, or you can do controls equals controls. Either one of those should work. And then with our source file, that's where you would use the source attribute, and you'd link to your file. So with the audio file, I'm going to say song.mp3, because that's going to be the choice that is going to work best. And then we need to say type. Type equals, and then we want to say audio, and then MPEG. And then with our video, we'll do source equals, so I'll just do that movie MP4, and then type equals video MP4. Again, if you're having a hard time remembering those, you can always go to the links and take a look at those. And with the video, we can also say like a width and height. So maybe I want to say width is going to be equal to 320, height will be equal to 240. If your video isn't that height, it'll just kind of force it to be that height and add some black bars around it. So let me save this, and even though we don't have anything, we can still preview it. So because I added the controls, we're able to see what this looks like. So I'm opening this up in Firefox. This is what Firefox looks like for the audio and video. Let me open this with Chrome. All right, so this one down here is Chrome. So it's got a bit rounded of a look for the audio. And we've got our little video player. This one up here, this is Safari. So they'll all look a little different. Like even though this one has a control, it doesn't really have that bottom part. The only one that's telling me that it's not supported with the format and everything, this is Firefox. So when that's telling me. All these other ones, it's still not going to play because the file doesn't exist. But it's at least letting us preview kind of what it would look like if it was there. So just like when working with your images, you can control the width and the height instead through your CSS, and that's what I would recommend that you do. So rather than having our width and height here, and I'll just leave it for a history, but we can say video, you could create a class or an ID, and we can just say I want the width to be 320 pixels, or better yet, maybe something responsive. And then height, let's just do 240 pixels as an example. You can also then, if you are making it responsive, you could add in a maximum dimension, you could do a minimum dimension, and what you could also do is you could say like, so let me do that as starters, so we have that, but then let me override it by saying I want the width to be 100%, and then I want the height to be auto, so it'll figure out with the aspect ratio being the same, how big does the height need to be in order for it to stay in the right aspect ratio in comparison to that width being the whole width of the screen. But then I can also say, but I want the maximum width to be 320 pixels, so it's only going to give it so much space to resize, which we can't really see because 320 is smaller than it's getting over here. Maybe we could do something a little better, like 1000. So it's going to resize until it gets to be 1000, and then it's going to not resize beyond that. And we could do a minimum. Maybe here we could do 300. Which that's such a small number, that might also not be noticed. Maybe, let's do 500, maximum, minimum. Now it's making this a little awkward horizontal scroll, so you would want to be really careful when picking those sizes for your mobile. All right, so the next one is the one that I think that you're actually going to use more often, and the homework that the book has, they use the audio and the video for their case studies, but when making your assignment, I wanted to actually change yours to working with an iframe. So let me find. So you will notice, if you go down a little bit on Canvas, HTML YouTube videos, and then W3 Schools iframe. I'm going to look at both of these at the same time. So looking first at iframe, because it's going to look at it a little bit more broadly, but you will use it most often for YouTube videos. So the iframe is an inline frame, and you can see here that you create this iframe tag, and then you put a source, and you can put something inside of it. They are putting a whole website inside of this frame, and then they've got a title for it. So if I click on this, it's putting this website inside of this box. So it's basically going to allow for you to put something that you want inside of this frame and reference what that is going to be somewhere else. So It could be another file. Let me see what other examples they have on here. So they're saying an inline frame is used to embed another document within the current HTML document, and then you can use CSS to style it. It's got documentation here for the browser support. And then here's a list of attributes, which your book isn't going to go into as much detail on this. So you can do allow, you can choose if you want to allow it to do full screen. You can control the height. You can control the source, the width. Those would be kind of the main ones that you want to look at. Now I'm going to take a look at this other link that W3 Schools has, and that is working with HTML YouTube videos. So you'll see here, this is using an iframe, and you can do width and height to control it. And then here for the source, it's going to use an embedded link to a video. So here they have Bohemian Rhapsody, and they're able to link to that. And let me show you what this would look like a little bit. So the idea here is, rather than having someone have to load a video on their own computer browser and you having to host it, you could put your files on YouTube and then embed them into your website. And what's great about that is you can really control your marketing. So you can have people stumble across it on YouTube as they're searching through YouTube. And then you can also have them find the content on your website. Now, some things you maybe wouldn't want to have on YouTube because it's not really something that you want people to browse. Maybe it's too specific to your website and it really doesn't make sense for somebody to randomly come across it. It's not really like browsing content. And so maybe that is something that you just want to have on your own computer. And actually, let me do a bit of a segue. So this is a little outdated now because this was a year ago, but in one of my more advanced classes, I like to have students do a project where they have to design a movie website, because I think it's a really good example of how people have a tendency to really push audio and video in ways that they don't necessarily do on regular websites. So you might have noticed that when this loaded up, there was this animation that happened on this website as it was coming up. And let me find some information. So here we have an image gallery of the different characters. You've got these little animations that happen as it goes from information to information. Now here there is a little video, and it's got it muted, that's showing little clips about this character. This is something that they are actually loading up on their own website. It's not being hosted on YouTube. And what's great about it is they can have this be any aspect ratio that they want. They have a lot of control of exactly how they want it to show up. And then what's kind of cool about it is, as you resize it from mobile, it resizes it so it fits on a phone better. So, and then also they have this really cool animation going on in the background of the whole screen. So there may be reasons why you might want to have your video actually be part of your website. So they have that on that character section. But then they've got this promotional content where they have trailers that they want people to encounter when they're browsing YouTube. And so they're putting these embedded on their website using iframe. And we've got trailer 1, and then we've got trailer 2 and trailer 3. And so I can look at it here, but then also by looking at this, I could actually go to YouTube. I could see if they have other promotional content on their channel. I could go and see comments, I could see ratings, maybe I could find other content that's also talking about it that's from other channels. So there's going to be benefits to having video content from both. And you may or may not have noticed in the bottom corner they have this little audio. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it with my recording, but it's just this real subtle kind of wind sound. If you're curious, you can go to dunemovie.com on your own later and you can check it out. But then they also have their own music section, and they also have a soundtrack section. So like here, they're having it play different audio from the movie. Again, I'm not sure if you'll actually be able to hear that very well in the recording, and I don't want it to be too loud, but what I like about it is they were also able to program it so it's changing, it's visualizing the audio. So that's something that's interesting you can do with programming that you couldn't do if you were just embedding an audio file that is being hosted from somewhere else, because that's another thing that we're going to look at. So you're probably all familiar with YouTube. So YouTube lets you, I'm scared to click on any of these things. These all look very sketchy. I guess I'm going to go for idiots in cars. So when you go to YouTube, there's a section where you can go to share. Now you don't want to just use the regular watch link if you're wanting to embed a video. You would want to go to the share button, and it's going to give you this option, and it's going to give you the embedded link. And you can even say where you want this to start the video at. And you can copy this. That would let you just share the link in general. What you want to go to is embed, and it's going to give you this iframe information. So a lot of times when you're adding an iframe, you just have to copy it over and maybe delete some things. So I'm going to copy this. We have that same thing at start. Show player controls, enable privacy. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And then in our Visual Studio Code, let's just add in an H2 that will say iframe element. And then we're going to put in our, our car video. And there's a bunch of stuff. So if you want this to be a different size, you could change this. If you do need to have the source. Title is a good idea. Frame border, that's up to you. There's some things in here that would be more important if somebody was on mobile, like accelerometer, autoplay, clipboard write. So you can keep that stuff if you want. But the basics of what you would need would be width, height, source, and then I do think title would be a good thing to have. So I could save that. And then I can refresh this. Oh, and it looks like the video is unavailable and they want us to watch on YouTube. I wonder if that's going to be just Firefox. Yeah, so they might have some privacy settings where they're saying that they don't want just anyone to be able to embed a video. So you can't necessarily just go out and grab anything. But that would be how you could get an embedded link to be able to use with the iframe. All right, so now that we have our idiots in cars, there is another website called Vimeo.com, Vimeo. This is another website that is used to host a lot of video content. And let me see if I can just kind of browse a little bit. So this is more of a website where if people were creating demo reels, if you were doing a lot of short video projects, animation, game, whatever it might be, this is used more by people who are creators who are wanting to share their content. It's less broad. Like YouTube is very broad. Everybody is putting stuff on YouTube, but there's fewer people who are putting stuff on Vimeo, and it tends to be a lot more artistic in nature. A lot of film stuff, a lot of animation. And so you can go and look at stuff. But you also have, like, let's say I'm interested in like 3-point lighting. You can go and see people's tutorials. So maybe you're interested in, maybe I should be more specific. You can go and see people's tutorials. Like here we have basic light setup, 3-point lighting. So you'll see a lot of really good tutorials on photography, video, animation, game. Because those people are interested in putting their content on here for their reels and everything. So you'll see a lot of professional content. When when I was a student and I was studying in time arts, a lot of students were creating demo reels and they would host their video content on here that they would then use for their portfolio. So if you're looking for a different kind of place to host your videos, you could use Vimeo, but there's going to be a lot less browsing. YouTube is going to be kind of your peak for browsing content. And then the equivalent for audio would be SoundCloud. Oh, and sorry, let's go back for a second. So let's say I do want to do this 3-point lighting. Whoops. I have the same option, share, and it will give me this embedded file. I can copy it, and we'll see if I can include that. You'll notice here we got source, width, height, frame border, allow autoplay, full screen, picture in picture. Again, you can kind of leave the basics. And let me refresh and see. So this one is letting me have it, and it'll show it where I can go and actually watch it on Vimeo, or I could go and watch it on YouTube if it were actually willing to show up. All right, so what I was going to say though is the equivalent for audio is a website called SoundCloud, and you can find all sorts of things. You can find podcasts, you can find music, you can find sound effects. Let's see if I can find a sound effect. Door opening. I mean, I'm a little scared to click on any particular thing. This one actually says sound effect, so maybe that would be. It says hashtag zombie apocalypse though. But okay, let's say that that's the one that we're interested in. I can go share, and then we have the option to embed it. Now, there's differences between like a pro account versus, but you do need to have an account to really be able to work with it. But pro ones will unlock it where you can actually have it smaller, where it doesn't take up as much space. If you don't have an account, it's going to make this bigger block. And you do have some options for being able to personalize it a little bit. Maybe you want to change the color so it fits a little bit better with your color scheme. We've got enable automatic play, show comments. This one's here is a little bit more understated, and then we can just go here, copy this. I'll put this in here. Similar things, we've got width and height. Because this one does have a box to it, scrolling, frame border, allow. Oh, let's see, I don't remember if I saved that. So then now we've got our SoundCloud iframe as well. This one is taking up the whole screen, so that would be a good one where maybe we want to say, actually, that is way too large. And I'm not sure what this is going to do, if it has sort of a default idea of the size it should be, but we might have to tell it to be a certain size because now it's cutting everything off. Now, I'm kind of curious with, so you can kind of play around with those. So you do not have to use audio, video, or iframe for your final project. Chances are, though, you may want to, just so that way you can kind of help fill up your pages with content and to help illustrate or kind of visualize some of the concepts that you are talking about in your research. So I would really recommend that you give that some consideration and think about how you might want to use that. All right, so that's going to be our media. The next thing that I'm going to have us look at is going to be looking at working with transforms and transitions. So I'm going to go down a little bit here because I have some links that help to visualize all of this. which I think will be a little bit easier than typing everything out. Let me see what the book has, if they've got any good illustrations. All right, so all of these for this first part, there's transform. You might be familiar with this concept if you've worked with like Photoshop or Illustrator before. It's basically changing the location, so X by X and Y, rotating, scaling, skewing, kind of repositioning it in some way. Now, usually that's going to be a static change where it just, whenever the page loads up, it'll just be a little bit offset. But you can use transform in combination with transition. So this is what the setting was, this is what it's going to be, and it will do a little basic animation as it changes between them. So here's an example with rotate where they're taking this picture, and just to make it look a little bit more natural, like it's actually laying on a table or something, they're giving it a little bit of a shadow, and then they're just rotating it a little bit so it doesn't look perfectly straight up and down. So that's an example of rotating it, but it's not going to animate, it's just going to stay put. So you type in the transform property, and then the value would be one of these. So the value is going to be a little bit like working with like RGB as a color value. You do color, RGB, and then you name your value. So rotate, you specify how many degrees it's going to rotate. Scale, you put in the X and Y number, or you can do scale X, scale Y, and then skewing. So you have all of those. Now let me see what we've got here for the W3 schools. So they kind of help illustrate this a little bit, and they also include matrix, which matrix lets you write all the values as one. So here they're showing the original value this would have been this location, and then it's going to the right 50 pixels and then down 100 pixels. This is where it helps again to think about how 0, 0 is the top left corner, and then positive is to the right, and then positive is down, negative is up, and negative is to the left. So here we've got 50 to the right, 100 down. So what if we did negative? It's going to go and it's going to put it the opposite direction. So just for you to think about. All right, so we've got translate. So you translate it to move it, which might be a little confusing because a lot of times when you look at that in like Photoshop or video editing, that'll be called position, but you're going to translate it to move it. We've got rotation, so you can put in a number and then the amount of degrees. So clockwise is going to be positive, negative is going to be counterclockwise. They've got examples of that. Scaling, you can scale the X amount and the Y amount, so it doesn't have to scale the exact same. It could scale at a different width than height. You could also make something smaller by using a decimal point. You can choose just one side, so X or Y. And then skewing, you'll see it's the same length, it's just changing the diagonals of these. So we've got 20 degrees, so it's changing 20 degrees by skewing that. And then matrix, we have scale X, skew Y, skew X, scale Y, translate X, translate Y. And then they've got some different exercises and information and everything in here. So rather than us doing this in our code, I'm going to just have us look at some links here. So this is CSS Tricks. This is a really great website for you to know about for in the future to look up. And actually, before I go into this, let me try to look up. All right, so when I like to talk about this, because a lot of the examples you're going to see, they're just going to jump ahead into animation because it gets used so much in animation. So I want to talk a little bit about the 12 principles of animation. So if someone was taking an animation class, these would be different things that they would learn. Not everything is going to be relevant to working with motion graphics, because that's basically what these things are. They're motion graphics, or you could also call it motion UI. Let me scroll down. So we've got squash and stretch. So the idea here is as something interacts with like a surface, it will squash and stretch, and that will make it seem more realistic. So let's say that you have a button, like a submit button, and you want it to seem more realistic. You might have it get bigger as you click on it to make it seem like it's expanding, and then as you unclick on it, it might go back down in size, and that's going to make it seem like you're actually interacting with that surface. Anticipation. The idea here is that sometimes you, like, let's say you're going to jump. You have to bend your knees in order to jump. You can't just jump with your legs straight. So there's certain movements you have to make before you can go into the next one. And you also need to make people aware of that change. That's kind of going into staging. So getting someone's attention, making sure things are noticeable. And that's something that is definitely relatable. This one, not so much. Straight on head action and pose to pose. We don't really have to worry about that so much. Follow through and overlapping action. The idea here is that to make something seem like a natural physics, it can't just stop. There's certain rules to our gravity that make it so if you have momentum and you're going forward, then you kind of need to settle back into your spot. So you may or may not use these as much. Here we've got slow in, slow out. So the idea here is that you're going to have more keyframes towards the beginning and end points and fewer in the center. So if you think about like driving a car, it takes you a while to get up to speed. And then also when you're braking, it's going to take a while to get back down to that speed. So you're going to spend more time on the speeding up and speeding down than you are in the center. And that's going to help make it look more believable. Arc, this talks about gravity. Things don't move straight across. Gravity affects it and brings it down. So whenever you have something moving, it's going to feel more realistic if it moves in an arc. Secondary action is just kind of creating more emphasis and complexity, timing. The longer that something takes, it changes the feeling of what that is. Like if this is taking longer, it'll make it feel like that material is made out of something else. And in our case, if you change how long something animates, it might make it feel more snappy. It might make it feel like the internet is just loading really slow. So you want to think about the timing of how things are interacting. Here they've got exaggeration, kind of making it just a little bit more playful and interesting. Just having good solid graphics, making something appealing by the design. So those are the 12 principles. So just wanted you to be aware of that before we go into these. So this is CSS Tricks, and it's a really great website for looking at CSS information. So I definitely recommend that you bookmark that, and you can look at this again later. And this first one is just going to show you a lot of kind of static graphics of what these look like. You'll notice a lot of these examples are actually from CodePen. That's another really great website to go to find examples. So here we've got HTML, the CSS, JavaScript if it's relevant, and then you can go to CodePen, you can kind of browse. Now, CodePen is going to be more advanced than where you are all at the moment, but definitely look at it in the future. So here they're just giving you some information. So they're creating this element, they're applying scale to it. Here they have those different values. But what I like now is here they have it animating, where they're changing the skew over time. So we've got our 3 elements, and then here we can see our CSS. Now they're making it a little more complicated because they're using animation, which is not a property that we're going to use. We're going to be using the transition. But it will work in kind of a similar way where you will say, I want it to be this at this time, and then over time I want it to change in a certain way. This gets a little more complex where you can say, how you want it to transform, and then you can also say the keyframes, which that will make more sense at a later point, in particular if you end up taking a video class with me. So here we've got these skewing. Got a couple examples here. We've got rotations. Here, this is showing rotating X, Y, and Z positions. So X is towards you or away from you on the X-axis. Y is on the vertical axis. And then Z is rotating like a clock. Translate. So it's moving over time. We've got multiple values matrix. And then they even have some information on 3D transforms. So this would be a really good one where you could go and you could look at the code, maybe even try to copy it and play with it a little bit on your own. This next one, CSS transitions and transforms. So we've got similar things. So we've got without a transition. So the idea here is if you think back to your pseudo classes where you have link, visited, hover, you can do a lot more with hover than just have the color change. You could actually have the size of something change. And with the transition property, you're able to say how you want it to change. Let me see if I can find the information. All right, so transition property provides for changes in property values to display in a smoother manner. So kind of like that ease in, ease out idea from the 12 principles of animation. You can apply a transition to a variety of CSS properties, including color, background color, border, font size, font weight, margin, padding, opacity, and text shadow. When you configure the transition for a property, you need to configure values for the transition property, transition duration, so like what it is, how long, and the timing function, and transition delay, so if you want it to wait a little bit before it actually kicks in. So the property indicates the CSS property to which you want it to apply to. So do you want it to apply to color? Do you want it to apply to background color, the border, whatever it's going to be? Duration, how long? Usually it's going to be seconds. It could be like 2 seconds or something. The transition timing function. This is why I wanted to show you the 12 principles of animation. So ease in, you ease into a value. Ease out, you ease out of a value. Ease in and out. It's kind of like that idea of the driving a car where you ease into speeding up and then you slow back down. And linear is just a constant change. No matter what you're doing, it's on a constant path to that change, which is less natural. So ease in, ease out is going to be more natural, or ease. Transition delay, if you want it to wait a little while before it kicks in. And then transition allows you to write them all at the same time. And then here they've got a definition of what all those look like. So that's where it's going to be helpful here. So right now, what you have with the homework website is you have the hover color changing immediately when you hover over the links. What you're going to do with the homework is you're going to add a transition, and it's going to change how long that takes. So here we've got a transition property, duration, timing function, delay. As an example. And here they've got duration, so 300 milliseconds, 1 second, 3 seconds. So you can kind of see what seems natural. Like 300 might be a little quick, depending on what you're trying to do. 3 seconds looks really slow. Here we've got a really good illustration of linear ease, ease in, ease out, ease in, out. This would be a good one for you to do yourself, so that way you can kind of you can more easily focus on all of them and see how they're working. You'll notice this bottom one, it's kind of snappy because it holds that position. This one's constant. And then the other ones are some sort of mix of ease. Here we've got a delay, so it doesn't happen immediately. That's just transforming the scale over a certain amount of time. This one's rotating. So there's a lot of really cool examples here. This one's doing translate over 1 second. It's also over 1 second. So most of these are kind of 1 second long. This one's a little goofy because it's depending on if your mouse is hovering over it, it changes. So it's a little goofy. And then they just kind of combine things together a little bit. What's cool too is here they've got Beginner's Guide to CSS Animation, so if you're interested in that, you can kind of look at that a little bit more on your own. Let me see if the book really had much more. I don't think they really go into too much with this. Looks like they have a little example where they look at the navigation a little bit. This will look really similar to your homework, where it has transition, background color, 2 seconds linear, so something like that. And this is where people get confused, is you apply it to the main selector of the thing. You don't apply it to the pseudo classes. So if you're trying to change the transition between the visited color, the link color, and the hover color, you don't apply it to the nav A visited, nav A hover, nav A link. You apply it to nav A, and then it will apply that transition to all of the pseudo classes. So make sure you keep that in mind. Here they've got some practice with interactivity and being able to have a thumbnail and then you hover over it to have a picture. I put a similar link on Canvas for you to look at. There is this CSS image gallery that I'd recommend where they have the different hovers. I think this example is pretty cool as well. So you can look at that. And then the, well, not quite the last thing that I wanted to look at, but one of the last big topics I wanted to talk about is the drop-down menu, and then also working with the summary and details elements. So let me go back to our file here. Now I don't need a billion of these. I think I'll just keep, oh, actually did I close? Of that one. Let me open this with Firefox. And these are kind of taking up a lot of space, so I think I'm going to go to the top here where it looks a little cleaner. And we're going to put in a drop down. So if you were curious about how to do a drop-down menu, or actually you could use this for creating a list inside of a list, a drop-down menu would be kind of a good way to put, a good place to put this. I'm going to do this as a nav, just so you have an idea of how this could be done with a nav. Alright, so we're going to create our unordered list, and inside of here we will have an li, the link, index.html. This will be our home page. I'm going to highlight this, copy it 3 times. Now, what I want is to have, actually, let me do a couple more times. So we're going to have like 5 of these. But I'm going to say one of these I want to have a subsection. So let's say that we've got portfolio, and then maybe we've got contact. I'll do 3 of these. I'll keep it so it's not too complicated. So maybe our portfolio is going to have more subsections. Let me switch this. This is portfolio. Maybe you want to do this and go back and work on your midterm after the semester's over. So what I've had some people try to do is add in another list inside of here, which is not a bad idea. It's just the wrong syntax for it. So what you have to do is you have to put your list inside of the li because it's a point of it. So in order to get this to work, I instead need to, I'm going to take that out. You're going to take this LI and move it onto the next line. So if that gets a little confusing, what you could do is you could indent the link inside of here, and you don't even have to have the link. So this link would take you to a portfolio page, but maybe it actually makes more sense to just say this category is going to be called portfolio. The LI is going to be called portfolio. And then inside of portfolio, we'd have an unordered list next to it. And for the sake of this example, I'm going to put this back, and that's just because the styles, I do want it to inherit the styles of the nav A to get it to actually show up right, but I just want you to know that you can just have the text. Alright, so we have this, and then underneath of it, we'll have our UL, and then inside of here, we can have our LI, and I'm just going to copy one of these. And then maybe instead of contact, maybe we've got wireframes. And then maybe we've got websites. Oops. Oh my gosh, I can't type. And then maybe we've got an assets page. Maybe it'd be better to just say digital media assets or something that's a little more specific. But that would be our styles. So I hit save, refresh. So here you can see where you could definitely use this for just a regular list inside of a list. It doesn't just have to be for a nav. So hopefully that will help you if anyone wants to do that in the future. And then what you can do is you can go in and you can style it where you can say, I want the nav UL li to have certain list style markers, but then you want the nav UL li to have these other ones. So you can switch it up all you want. You just have to be good at writing your descendant selectors. So in the style section here, I'm going to just write some styles. I'm going to take these from one of the examples in the book. So we're going to add a background color to the nav. It's going to have letter spacing 0.1 M. I'll kind of walk through what all of this is doing. And then I also have an example from the W3 schools. All right, finally done. Sorry. Hopefully you were able to follow along and look at that. And it's okay if you just want to watch and you don't want to do it yourself necessarily. Okay, so what we have is we've got background colors is dark blue, letter spacing, just spreading things out a little bit, bold. Text align right says to the right of everything, padding to the right of 2M to space it out. The list has no markers and no margin. The individual items have a little bit of padding. They are displaying as inline, so they're going next to each other. The links themselves have no underline, and they are block, which isn't going to matter for us. And then we have link color is white. If we have clicked on it before, it's going to be kind of this white color. They're these like slight different colors of gray, but they're really similar. Hover is going to have this kind of gray color, so be pretty similar. And then here's where things start getting interesting. So we have the UL inside of the UL. So in this case here, the position is absolute, so it's going to be in this exact spot. We've got the background color is a slightly lighter blue color, padding. There's not going to be any, it's going to be left aligned, and then display is set to none by default. So all of these styles exist, but by default it's hidden, and so you can't see it. And then here we have the LI inside of here. We've got the border, the display blocks, they're stacking over top of each other. We're making sure that there's enough space for them. We're aligning, we have a little bit of left padding margin. And then what we're saying is when we hover on the LI inside of a nav, then I want the UL to switch to display block. So that's where it shows up out of nowhere, basically. So that's how you get that to work. Now, if you go online, you can find all sorts of examples on how to do drop downs. The problem is they overcomplicate their examples by using a ton of divs, and it's all the same idea. It's just if you're looking at it and you're not really familiar with what you're looking at, it could seem like, oh, this is just way too hard, I could never do this. So now that you have this one example, you can kind of break down what's going on here as well. So we've got a div that's called dropdown, and then we have this stuff inside of it, and we've got the dropdown content. And so what's happening here is we've got the dropdown is relative, it's got this inline block, the content is not showing up, but it's got an absolute position, it's got a color, it's got this box, it's going to take up all this space. And then when you hover over the dropdown, then this dropdown content is going to display. So pretty straightforward. Let's see if they've got any other examples in here. Here we've got a menu. This looks really nice. So same thing, drop down button this time. Drop down content A, and then drop down content A hover. So when you hover over the drop down content A, then we've got these are going to show up. And then we've got drop down hover, drop down button. But it's doing it all with these classes. All with these classes and these divs, which can get a little bit hard to look at. The next thing that your book has is sort of similar with a drop-down where you have the benefit of being able to conceal some information, so it takes up a little bit less space. And that's using this details element and the summary element. So here they've got a good picture where you have principles of visual design, repetition. If you click on it, it'll drop down and it'll tell you a little bit more about it. And this is pretty straightforward, so I'm not even going to worry about going into too much detail on this, but you basically take the details element and then you put in the summary. That's going to be the text where if you click on it, it will show what's underneath of it. Then you can put whatever you want underneath. In this case, they're putting a paragraph. So you could put like an image or something, or maybe you want this to be like an FAQ where someone could go and they could click and find more information. But the details will be the individual container for each of these little pieces, and then the summary is kind of like the link that you click on, and then whatever goes under it, inside of it with the summary, that will be what shows up. So that's a really good example. So that's kind of the key things there, and then what they leave you with at the end of the chapter is just like a little bit of a taste of future concepts. So they've got some information about JavaScript, and the way I think about JavaScript is I think of HTML as the structure, CSS is the style, and then JavaScript is the interactivity. And it's more complex than that, but that's kind of the key way that you can kind of break it down. So they give some information here on working with JavaScript. JavaScript is considered to be object-based because it's used to work with the objects associated with the web page document. JavaScript is used more and more often all over the place. It's a really great beginner programming language, and a lot of times if you're going into programming, they'll start you with JavaScript just because it can be used for a lot of things. Even if you're less interested in being a web developer and you're more interested in, let's say, digital media, there's a lot of things that you can use JavaScript for. If you are interested in doing anything with like motion graphics and animation, if you're using software like Adobe After Effects, you can actually change how something is animating the motion graphics in After Effects by using JavaScript. So you can use it for a lot more than just using it for websites. And here they have a simple little example where they have the H2 says today is, and then you insert some JavaScript, and it's basically going to pull up based off of your computer's information what the date is, and then it's going to change this text so that way it basically writes out what that time is. So it'll say today is, and then it fills it in for you. And then they mention jQuery. So jQuery is a popular JavaScript library. It basically helps to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. You know, there's only so many ways that you can build a carousel, or in this case they mentioned like image slideshows, animation, event handling. And so a lot of times people will come up with that code, and then you can use the library to call that up and be able to use it, and it can make things a little bit more interesting, and sometimes it can be a little bit easier. There's tons and tons of libraries. In the next video, I already recorded it, but I'm going to talk about a library that's called Processing, p5.js, that I really like to use for creating artwork and animations at least. So jQuery is one of the most popular ones and one of the most useful ones, and they've got an example here working with a little slideshow. This is something that you're going to learn a lot more about if you take a JavaScript class. The book really just leaves it at, by the way, this is a thing. Next, they talk about working with HTML5 APIs. So an API is Application Programming Interface, which is a protocol that allows software components to communicate, interacting, and sharing data. And they've got some examples: geolocation, web storage, progressive web applications, two-dimensional drawing, and they go into a little more detail on here on all of those. So those would be worth looking at. And then one of the things I like the most, and this is where I end up having a little bit of information in the next video about open processing, is you can use the canvas element to create places where you have artwork. So you could create like a little ad that you could have on there, but because you work with JavaScript, you can actually have animation, you can bring audio into it, you can bring video into it, you can do all sorts of interesting things with this canvas element. And that's why I kind of had that Dune website earlier. I can't say specifically what the website used when they were working on animating that little intro, but you can do some interesting animation things by using things like Canvas and then working with a library, whether it's the one I'm going to talk about later or if it's another one. And I've got a link here to the W3 schools. They've got this Canvas graphics, and they talk about the support for it. Just use Canvas, and then you can add JavaScript to it. So like here they have drawing a line, drawing a circle, adding some text, adding some gradients, drawing circles with it, drawing images. It seems really basic. Like you might think, why not just create that somewhere else and then bring it in as a graphic? But what's nice about this is if you learn about JavaScript more, you can learn about how you can actually have something animate and you can change it so that way it can change based off of how long something has been shown up. Or if somebody's interacting with something, it could pull up that same information and change like what it says based off the day it is. So you could have like an ad or something that could actually change over time. Now, I'm going to try not to be too redundant because like I said before, I already recorded the next video, so I already know how much I talk about open processing. But it's a library that uses JavaScript and Canvas, the Canvas element, to do all sorts of interesting artwork. And this would be something that would be created with JavaScript, where it's changing and animating this over time. What's great about this website is it will show you the person's code. So you can host your code on here for free, but then by doing that, you agree that other people are allowed to see your code. So it's a really great place to see what other people have done. We've got particle systems. Some of these things are interactive, some of them aren't. See, this even has like CC attribution, non-commercial share alike. So some people are even willing to share some of these things. Some people have used this to make like little games. So to move, use arrow keys, touch, or a joystick. I'm bad at this sort of thing, so I'll just leave it. But it's able to like track like your points and everything. Let's see what else. These ones I think are really cool. There's brushes, drag and draw. So it'll create these little graphics. This one's a lot more random. And then let me see, like this one you'll see, and this would depend on if you're on a computer with a camera or not, but you can even actually bring in camera information. So this is just one example of a bunch of different libraries that you can use with JavaScript, that you can make things interactive, you can make it more interesting, and you can just really provide a really creative experience for your users, whether it's doing just like simple motion UI, kind of similar to what the book talks about with doing the transitions, or you could really code something quite elaborate with JavaScript down the line. This is going to be everything that I'm going to talk about in this video. I recorded already this other one where I'm going to talk about responsive design and future resources. That one should be pretty short in comparison to this one. If you've got any questions about the topics in this video, or if you've got questions on the homework or the final, you can leave a comment in the discussion, or you can send me an email.